Hi, this is James Valvis, and today I'm going to be doing another poetry feature featuring a poet that is not me. In this case, it is the wonderful Michael McNeilley. Now, for those of you who don't know, Michael McNeilley was a poet who died in 2000, July 2000, I believe, and he was he was a very close friend of mine, at least online. We knew each other very well. And he was a big supporter of my work. I was a huge fan of his work. I can't say supporter because we were not equals in accomplishment at the time. He was far more accomplished than I was, even though I've subsequently become as accomplished as he is, maybe more so. But he was an outstanding poet. And unfortunately, I don't even know who to ask in order to do this feature. I don't know who I could, write to and who his literary executor is, or if he even has one. But I want to do it because over the years I've seen Michael's work just slowly start to disappear. He's not come into favor in a big way, and his work is over time. These websites that publish his work, or is it these journals that publish his work, are fading out and going into the way of the dodo, and along with it, his work is slowly disappearing, and so I'm hoping to revive his reputation a little bit here, and I'm also hoping to preserve his work somewhat, especially his his poetry as much as possible. I've already started to download some of his work so that I can keep it on my website and maybe do some kind of bigger feature at a future date. But and if you're a young editor out there and you're looking for someone to publish, someone to put work out there, and you're excited about maybe sharing the work of a great writer who's been overlooked, you really should look at Michael's work. You should really think about putting out a real book of his work, finding out who his literary executor is, and then going out there and putting forth a McNeilley collection that would do him justice, because he's an absolutely outstanding writer, as these poems I'm about to share with you will prove to you. And there are so many great writers who get overlooked. It's a lie to think that always the cream rises to the top. There are some second-raters who are immensely famous now in the literary world, or in the world of literature. There are hacks out there who are making millions of dollars, and they have tons and tons of fans all over the place. And yet a writer of McNeilley's power and beauty is completely overlooked, and that's something of an injustice. As I said, we were friends. We were friends for about a decade, maybe a little less than that, but about a decade. And in that time, I've read hundreds of McNeilley poems. You can't find them anymore. Most of them are gone. They're on some hard drive somewhere, if they even exist anymore. They're not available online. There are no chapbooks that I know about. And if there are, they're obscure and hard to find. There are no... there are probably literary magazines out there with a lot of Michael's work. I just don't happen to have them. However, there are some remaining pieces online that you can find, and I hope that after you read this feature, after you listen to this feature, you'll go out and you'll find more of his work, and you'll appreciate him, and you'll support him. You'll talk about him from time to time. You'll bring up his poems. The poet really doesn't have a whole lot of ability to promote himself, especially once he's died. So you really need people to stand up and say, listen, this is wonderful stuff. This is terrific. You really need to go check it out. You need to support this. Otherwise, it will disappear. It will die. It will go away. Whatever enjoyment you got out of it will not go on to the next generation. There are many people in the poetry world now who have never heard of Michael McNeilley's name, despite the fact that he was a widely published and widely respected writer at the time. So let me read a couple of these bios that I found of Michael, and I don't think that they do him justice, but I do want to read them so that you get some kind of technical idea of the level of accomplishment that he had at the time that he was dying. I don't even know if these were the newest bios that he was putting out. They're just the ones that I could find. Okay? And so, the first one was on the Unlikely Stories Presents website. And it said that poems and stories by Michael McNeilley have appeared in hundreds of print and electronic publications, including the New York Quarterly, Slipstream, Mississippi Review, Sonoma Mandala, Chicago Review, Impetus, Chiron Review, and Poet. McNeilley is a graduate of the University of Colorado, has worked as a journalist, stagehand, graphic artist, and corporate vice president, and he currently, or at the time, currently worked full-time. McNeilley lived in Aberdeen, Washington. His recent books at the time of this and chapbooks included Editing Lessons from Olympia River Press, Grift from God's Bar Press, Love and Beer from Zero City Press, 15 Haiku from Lilliput Review Press, and Punchlines from AAR Press. That last one was at 1998, and he died on July 16, 2000. The second one that I'm going to read to you is here at the Situational Reality site, and it goes as follows. Michael McNeilley was the founding director of the National Student News Service, worked as a reporter and a correspondent in Washington, D.C., and has published hundreds of poems and stories in magazines such as New York Quarterly, New Delta Review, Poet, Chicago Review, Oyster Boy Review, Cross Connecticut, Hyphen, Minotaur, Slipstream, Cafe Review, Pink Cadillac, Chiron Review, Poetry Review, Poetry Motel, Plasm, Dam, Lilliput Review, Bouillabaisse, Writers Forum, Green Fuse, Rockford Review, Mississippi Review, God's Bar, Unplugged, Impetus, Tight, Zeeb, Penny Dreadful, Exquisite Corpse, Atom Mind, and elsewhere, including websites worldwide. He was co-editor of Zero City in the 90s. Now, Michael, I think I met Michael through Zero City. He edited it with a guy named J.J. Webb, a guy who really came to dislike me quite a bit, but he was an astute eye for good poetry. Zero City was always a good journal. It was always fun to read, and I was in there once, but he was an outstanding editor, and he was an outstanding poet, and a good portion of my life is directly related to him, and indebted to him, influenced by him. It's not only influenced to me as a writer, but it was because of him that I met my wife indirectly. McNeilley pointed my wife to Rana Androla, who I interviewed at one point, and my wife and I met, and so everything that's come out of my life is indirectly related to Michael. And so I really hope that by doing this feature, I'm paying him back in some small way, because he's most of my happiness is indirectly related to him. I mean, it's not like he chose to do any of this stuff or he intentionally did it, but it's still, I'm thankful to him for it. And so, what's to say? One time, let me talk about the one time that I tried to meet Michael McNeilley. My wife and I decided that we were going to go down to Aberdeen, Washington, and we were going to meet Michael. And so we drove down there, and then we drove around for a while, and we could not find where he lived. We just drove and drove, and we got lost. We couldn't find it, and eventually we gave up. And I've always regretted it, because it was my one chance to meet the guy, Of course, you always think you got forever. You don't think that a guy, he wasn't that old when he died. He was a relatively young man, but of course he was he was crippled, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was so he didn't move much, and his health was deteriorating, and eventually he had that heart attack and he died. It was very sudden, and nobody was expecting it, and I was just devastated by it because he was such a good friend, and he was really the shining light of the little group that we had. I mean, he was. I would say that he was the most talented of us. I don't think that he was the most. That he was the most learned of us. That might eventually be me, because I would go on to really study. I remember one time I asked Michael, "What do you read? What should I read? I'm a young guy. I'm a poet. I'm trying to become a better poet. What should I read?" And he said, "Well, I read the guys that Bukowski told me to read." So he read Fonte and Baudelaire and Celine and those kinds of guys, and then. But that seemed to be it. And it's unfortunate because McNeilley had the talent to be a lot better than he was. And I think a lot of people knew that. He would get in arguments online, and it would eat up a lot of his time. And he didn't seem to really ever go beyond the level that he stood at the time. At one time, he never rose above that. Of course, the level he was at was just outstanding. So it's hard to fault him for not doing more, but at the same time, what a loss when he died. I was very sad, and I'm still sad about it. That he died relatively young, that he died not so suddenly and without any ability to see to it that his work had a lasting legacy. This is all tragic, very tragic. I mean, he left behind a woman that he cared about deeply, and she was in financial straits over it, and it was pretty tragic. And in our group, which consisted of some pretty darn good writers, I really thought that he was the most talented. I really did. Some might have argued it was me. It's possible. But you can't judge yourself like that. I don't know. I don't look at the world like that. Looking out and seeing who was there and what were they doing at the time, and I just wanted to be Michael McNeilley. I wanted to be at that level. I wanted to be able to publish in the New York Quarterly, which I couldn't at the time, and I wanted to be able to publish in places like academic places like Chicago Review and Mississippi Review. I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't even able to get into something like Oyster Boy, even though my friend Craig Nelson was editing it. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to do a feature one day on Nelson as well, because he also passed away suddenly and young, and it's they're both pretty tragic. So anyway, Michael was a terrific guy. He could be what my aunt used to always call a skadooch, a pain in the butt, but he was an outstanding writer and a really truly inspiring individual for me as a poet. And I really hope that in some way this adds to his legacy and extends his legacy, and that there's a revival of sorts of his work, and that it builds over time, that we come to appreciate this wonderful writer, and he's not forgotten and lost to time. And so let me read the poems. Let's celebrate his life and his work, and above all, Michael, if you can hear this, thank you so much for all the happiness that you brought in my life with your work and beyond. The Pull of the Abyss by Michael McNeilley. I walk out to the mailbox, and though there is no letter from you again, there is a free trip to Japan, and a box of chocolate-covered haiku, and I eat the haiku, though they are strictly off my diet. And I forward the free trip to Japan, which is not addressed to me anyway, to its rightful recipient. I walk out to the mailbox and find the path particularly long, unusually steep, rutted and rocky, but dry at least. And the mailbox hands me a letter. The letter is from an ex-wife. She is gloating about her recent sexual experiences with a prior ex-husband, and I take the letter back to the house with me on a particularly steep and rocky path home, and repackage it with a cover letter to the editor of Handjob, and glide back down the hill to the mailbox, which accepts this gift in the spirit given, swallows it like a cough syrup with a tiny burp. I walk out to the mailbox and am moved by the mailbox's inner beauty. I open the mouth of the mailbox, pull out its long aluminum tongue, and it regurgitates to me a t-shirt catalog from the Fat Guy clothing store. But the Fat Guy clothing store catalog t-shirts shrink after a few washings, so that fat guys can't wear them anymore. And I put the catalog back in the mouth of the mailbox like a wafer to its tongue, and close the jaw and pull up the red flag. I walk out to the mailbox, alert to dodge the drug-crazed grannies of death who drive Plymouth minivans up and down my street, tranked out on multiple prescriptions of Medicaid serotonin reuptake inhibitors, Valium and Alprazolam, Hellstore Valerian, and Reds from the Bingo Palace, cursing me through their rolled-up windows, waving bony fingers I try to ignore, and find the mailbox full of birthday cards. I walk out to the mailbox just as the sun comes out, blazing like death, and Ed McMahon appears from behind a bush, waving a big sign, "Free, free, free." A check the size of a billboard rises behind him, and he yells to me, "This check could have your name on it if..." And I run back to the house muttering, "I'm sorry, I cannot afford to accept any more gifts at present." I walk out to the mailbox, and instead of your letter, I find a small white envelope from the IRS, and I know it is not a check. And I feel like a 78 Firebird with one plug wire off, straining up a mountain road, sputtering and hissing, the hot smell of burning oil, radiator hissing, wheel drawn by the pull of the abyss. I walk out to the mailbox, and the mailbox contains an inflatable wheelchair, and I pull it out and blow into one tire and blow into the other tire and blow up the frame, the seat, the back, the little wheels in front, until I am too tired to stand, and I sit down, but the wheelchair grabs me, pulls out huge rolls of duct tape, tapes me down, and I am glad you are not here to see me, wheelchair bound. I roll out to the mailbox and find a card from the government granting me health, and a bill from the government for health and other services. But the bill is more than I can pay, and I push my wheelchair into the envelope, seal it with a kiss, and send it off, postage due, and still I feel better. I walk out to the mailbox and find a woman is leaning against it holding a bottle of Jameson's. She wears a tiny black dress like a massage, and inside some smaller bottle. Her hair the color of sailor's delight. And I ask, "How may I help you?" And she says, "Do you have any Grey Poupon?" And I say, No, I only have regular American mustard, the yellow kind, taxi cab yellow mustard like for corn dogs." And she says, "That'll do then." And the evening begins without error. I walk out to the mailbox, and I walk out to the mailbox, and I walk out to the mailbox, and turn and cannot see my way home. The mailbox glistens like an iceberg in the chill winter morning air, foghorns in the far and bitter distance, and I stand on the sloping deck of my life as the band strikes up one last tune and deck chairs slide past me into the cold Atlantic, whispering your name. Wasn't that a wonderful poem? Michael is really, really awesome when he's on. When he's hitting the high notes, he's just as good as they get. And keep in mind, these poems were written maybe 30 years ago, but they feel like they've been written maybe just 5 minutes ago. They're terrific. Here's a poem that was originally published in the New York Quarterly, and it's called If You Keep a Rat in a Cage. If you keep a rat in a cage, the rat will lose the impulse to bite you, will take food from your hand gently before running away with it, back into the corner, will climb above on the perches like a bird in the night, will race to the cage door in the dark and watch you pass, hoping, will press its face against the bars, against the door as you pet it, as you stroke it kindly with one finger, will perch on your shoulder and run around inside your coat and try not to piss on you. If you keep a rat in a cage and you leave your best wool sweater there, too close by, the rat will drag it in, pull it through the narrow opening between the bars with a strength that seems supernatural, and tear the crap out of it. Pull the shreds together in a huge rat's nest and sleep in it, happily shrouded in closeness to you. If you keep a rat in a cage, there is no guarantee the rat will come to love you, but chances are good. As is the likelihood the rat will be authentic in its affection, will be kind and return good treatment in kind. And if the rat escapes, the chance is strong it will return from beneath the eaves, chattering, turning its head to one side, showing one red rat eye, unblinking, entreating. Freedom is not so much. Take me back in. Are you starting to get it? Are you starting to see what a wonderful artist this is? And what a shame it is that he's largely been forgotten, that you never see his name anywhere at any time. What a shame. What a terrific writer. I haven't read these poems in maybe 5 or 6 years now, and they just pull me back into the strength of his voice. He's an incredible, incredible writer. Unbelievable. And what follows is perhaps my favorite. It is my favorite Michael McNeilley poem, and it's one of my favorite poems of all time. It is absolutely a virtuoso piece. It's a masterpiece, and it deserves to be in every anthology of modern American poetry, and that it's not is a crime. This poem is called The Turtle Who Looked at Napoleon. Exiled to St. Helena in the South Atlantic, in 1815, Napoleon turned to gardening, turning the soil with the simple implements at hand, spacing the tiny seeds in straight, long rows with military precision. Napoleon's jailer, Sir Hudson Lowe, found himself as bothered by the rows of the Corsican Guard disguised as radishes, ranked across the earth outside his office window, as by Napoleon's contentment. In a singular act of creative malevolence, Lowe sent off to the Galapagos for 2 giant land turtles. The frigate bearing them arrived. Lowe named the turtles Jonathan and Josephine and set them loose in the garden of Napoleon. Bulldozers by nature, the giant tortoises nosed up and swallowed down the radishes, tomatoes, turnips, carrots, and onions, smearing Napoleon's careful rows into the dust. Over morning coffee, through office window bars, Sir Hudson sat smiling at Napoleon's eaten and uprooted flattened garden. One day as he watched, Napoleon himself rounded the corner, moving slowly, contemplating the sea. Dressed in a gardener's tunic, head towel draped against the heat of the South Atlantic sun, Napoleon bumped along, crouched on the back of Jonathan, eyes straining past the breakers as if to spot Nelson's flagship. Low watched, somewhat dismayed, as Napoleon surveyed the sea from his rolling helm, squinting into the noon sun for the mirage of his emancipation. But Napoleon died in 1821, his power drained, unable to adapt to turtle life, powerless to attain contentment in slow uncoverings, green vegetation, and long waiting. Wild goats pulled up the grass of the Galapagos, and the big land turtles suffered starvation, their ancient ranks further thinned by sailors who found them excellent for soup and shell. But fine grass grew on the grave of Napoleon, and on the grave of Jonathan's mate, who died soon after of some turtle disease. A turtle grieves long, but St. Helena offers food and good weather, and Jonathan remains there today, lifting his old head among the flies. Bonaparte, still barely legible, carved low near the rim of his giant shell. Jonathan opens a red-rimmed, baleful eye to the morning, an eye that gazed upon Napoleon, the eye of a turtle of destiny, who thought no more of the little man long ago riding than he thinks of today's flies. But Jonathan still considers the radishes, as they arrive each day at sunset, compliments of the British government, a long-time legacy of Sir Hudson Lowe, and Jonathan is often content. In 1840, Napoleon's remains were shipped to Paris. In the compound in St. Helena, little of Napoleon but his death mask now remains. Not even a tree still grows there that gave Napoleon shade. But Jonathan moves slowly on, across the volcanic surface, through what was once a garden, resolute, his three-chambered heart slowly beating, eye upon a nearby clump of grass, as green and new as once upon Galapagos. And so there you have it. Isn't that wonderful? I always hope that I read these poems and do them justice, and I trip over my words, and I say things, and little beeps happen in the background. But I really hope that these have given you the great joy that they've given me over the years. He was an incredible writer and a great friend and a terrific soul and spirit. And I do hope that you go forth and share his work, read his work, study his work. If you're a young poet, you can learn a lot by reading Michael's stuff. If you're a publisher, by all means, try to reprint some of these poems in your journals. It's not going to hurt anybody. Nobody's read them. The turtle poem that I love so much, there are people who are in college today who weren't even around when this was published. So it's time to share this stuff again, to make it known, to share it in the world. Let's not forget our poets. whether they're large or small, big or mighty and famous, or just obscure and but talented. We need to remember our poets. If you're a poet reading this, listen to this, you need to advance other poets. You need to advance poetry, great poetry, because the alternative is that all people will see is bad poetry, and that'll turn them off to poetry. You have to share the good stuff. You have to go and say, look at this guy, look how awesome he was. And Michael really was awesome. And I really wish that we had found his place, but maybe not. Maybe it's better this way. Maybe, our poets and our heroes are maybe better not met face to face. I don't know. Either way, I hope you appreciated this discussion of Michael's work. And as always, thank you for listening. And God bless you.